Hello, welcome to another How to Code Well PHP tutorial. Today we're going to look at PHP connecting to MySQL. This is something that I know that a lot of you have been asking for. So today we're going to start a new series on how to actually do that. And in the future we're going to look at different ways we can actually manipulate records in MySQL using select queries, insert queries, delete queries, and so forth. Today though, we're just going to look at how we can establish a connection to MySQL via PHP. Now, as always, this is going to be in the How to Code Well GitHub repository that I'll put a link in the description to. What we're going to do is create two files. One is called index.php and another one is called connect.php. And then I'm going to spin up a web server that demonstrates the connection. First of all, though, I would like to just go through some of the documentation on the php.net site. So this is the MySQLi underscore connect. Now, please note we're using MySQLi, not MySQL. Okay, this is the procedural way of how we do this. So we can connect to it through a functional way. So this is the function MySQLi underscore connect, passing in some variables here. And then we check that we have a link. We've established a connection. And we can do that checking the underscore connect underscore error no and underscore connect underscore error. So we're going to do this, but we're going to do it in a object orientated way. Okay, so there is an object called MySQLi that we're going to use. So the first thing we're going to do is just create our new file in here, and this is just literally going to be connect. So connect.php. And what I'm going to do, let's just drag that back down here. So this is the file that we've got, and we're just going to establish some rules, some configuration for connecting to this. Because if you see here, we have the host, we have the username, and we also have the password as well as the name of the database that we wish to connect to. We can also supply the port and the socket if we wish. So what I'm going to use for this is PHP Constants. So we're just going to do const, and then we're going to have db underscore host, and we're going to equal that to just the local host. And we're going to have const again, and we're going to do db underscore name, and I'm just going to set that as an empty string for now, and then also const, and then db underscore user, all uppercase, user name, as well as const db underscore, and we're going to use db password. And again, I'm going to have that as blank. Now, the reason why I've got these as blank is because I'm going to actually connect to the database through the command line first to ensure that I have actually got access to this database. And then what I'm going to do is copy those configuration bits and pieces over here. So what I've got running on the terminal here is just a blank terminal window. We are currently in this working directory. If I did ls, we can see that we have this connect file. But what I want to do is actually make sure that we can connect to the database through the command line first, because it's always worth making sure that you can connect to the database in different means other than just a programming language, because that helps you debug it. Perhaps you've spelt something wrong. So if you can establish a connection through the command line, then you should be able to establish a connection through PHP. And if you can't, then there's probably something wrong with your configuration. So let's do that. Let's connect to the database through the command line. Now, I've already got MySQL installed on my Mac here. I'm not going to go through how to do that, but I essentially used Homebrew for this. Normally I would use Docker, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more later on. But just for speed and ease, I'm just going to use it straight from my machine. So let's do MySQL -u, because that's going to be the username, and I've shown how to do this in a previous MySQL console tutorial that I'll put a link to the description as well. So we're going to do the username of root, and we're going to use -p. -p is the password. this is going to prompt you with the password. So press enter and it's going to prompt. And the password, I believe, I've just set it to test. And there we have. We've got a connection established. And if I was to do show and then databases, we can see all the databases that we've got. So we can actually now connect to the database through PHP. We have what we need. We've got the username, we've got the password, as well as the name of the database that we've got. We can see that we have a couple of databases here. The database we're going to be using is Docker in Motion. Docker in Motion is the database that I've got for my Docker in Motion course that I've got for Manning Publications. That you can get yourself if you're interested in Docker. I'll put a link in the description below, as well as in the card at the top here. So what we can do is just use Docker in Motion, and from that we can then do a bunch of select queries and so forth. Now we want to try and get out of the this command line. We want to connect to it through PHP. So what we need to do is supply some of these configurations. So the database name in this case is docker _in_ motion, like so. And the username here, we've got root, and the password here is just test. So this is going to connect to that database through these configuration rules. Now obviously we need to write some code to actually establish this connection. And like I said, we're going to do this in an object-oriented way, and we're going to use the MySQLi class. Now the MySQLi class allows you to make a connection through the constructor. So when we instantiate a new MySQLi object, we can connect to that database if we supply the configuration rules. So what I'm going to do is just have a function here called connect, and in that function I'm going to take some parameters. So the parameter here is just db host, db name, db username, and also db password, like so. And this is basically going to allow me to send this configuration into this function. You can imagine that this configuration here could be in a separate file. This could be in a configuration file completely separate to this. And what we're going to do now is establish a connection. So we've got a variable here called db, and we're going to equal that to a new instance of the MySQLi object. So new MySQLi, and the MySQLi object takes a bunch of properties, so host, username, password, database name, port, and socket. Now all of these are actually optional. We don't actually need to supply anything to the MySQLi in order to instantiate an object. But if we do so, we can establish a connection, which we're going to do here. So the first one is the host. So db host. Oops. The next one is going to be the actual part, the username. So db username, and the next one is the db password, I believe, and finally we've got the db name, like so. Now what I'm going to do is just split these up just to make it a little bit more readable, like so. And what we should do after we've got this object is actually make sure that we have a connection established. And like I showed you before with the documentation, we can use the connect_error and connect_error number or error no to ensure that we have a connection established. So what we can do here is do an if db, because that is the object. So now we can look at the parameters here. So the parameters of this object, we've got connection error as well as connect error number. So we can do if error connect error, and we're just going to do a die of that. So we can do cannot connect to database, and we're just going to concat that. So db connect error. Let's just make that a little bit more user-friendly, and because of the short real estate, I'm just going to bring that down here like so. Okay, so this is going to say if we have a connection error, then kill everything, so run the die, which I've shown you before in another tutorial on how to use die and exit as language constructs. And here we're going to return a message, cannot connect to the database, and we're going to pass in this. We're also going to do, what we can do actually is we can put this in like that, put in a new line, and then do a new line under here, and also have this here, so we've got let's do db, and we can do error number, so connect error number like so. So that's going to give us the error as well as the error number if there is one. And after that, so if we have established a connection, we can return the db object. And from that db object, we can then go on to run some other queries. Okay, so we can actually query the database, run some selects, run some inserts, run some deletes, and so forth with that connection established. So first of all, we are checking that we have not got an error. Okay, so if we have an error, then we kill the script. But if we haven't got the error, if we don't land into this, we return the database, or we return the connection of the database, I should say. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to create another file called index.php that requires or includes this file here, and then we can run the connection. So what we can do here is open that up, and what I'm actually also going to do is create a new file, a new PHP file, and I'm just going to call this config. So config like so, because it's easier when they're when you've got things named correctly. So let's do connect. Let's copy this. Let's remove that from there and put that into the config. So now you can see that you're splitting out the config from the business logic. Okay, so we have the connect, which just does a connection. You're passing in all of these parameters in here, and it's returning a database if we have a connection established. And we've got the config like so. So the next thing we can do is create a new file. We're just going to call this index.php. And this index file is simply going to be how we establish a connection, so running that connection. So the first things we need to do is require once, and we're going to do config. So that's going to allow us to have access to all those constant variables. And also we're going to have require once, and we're going to have connect.php, which means that we have access to that function. So we can do db equals connect, because that is the function that we've just created, and we can pass in some bits and pieces. So we have the db host, the db name, the username, and the password. So here, because we have access to the constants, we can do db underscore, and I believe it was host, and then I think it was db underscore name, maybe. Let's have a look. Yeah, db name, then the username, and then the password. I'm just going to bring this out a little bit so we can see a little bit more. So db name, that's great. And then the next one is going to be db username, like so. And let's just put these on different rows so you can see them a little bit better. And after that, we have the password. Now, you may have noticed that there are two other parameters that we can supply, which are the port as well as the socket. Now, if you don't supply those, that's perfectly fine. you're just going to use the default values for those things. So you need to be sure that the configuration that you've got is correct. Okay, so this is going to run that function, and that function will return the instance of the MySQLi if the connection has been established. So what we can do is just do if db, client inf, let's do client, actually, let's just do if db is an instance of MySQL, like that, and we can actually return some bits and pieces if we have a connection established. One thing we can do is just do an echo. We can do client info like this, and we can do db client info. Let's just put that as another line like this, and let's do another echo of client version, because what we can do is return the version of MySQL that we're using. And did you see here, let's go back a minute, there is a function called getClientInfo as well. Okay, so we can access the properties as well as call those methods too. So here we're running sorry, let's go back to the top. Here we're including the configuration. We're requiring it once, and then we're requiring the connection. So that means that we have the access to these constants as well as access to this connect function. We're then creating a variable called db, and we're equaling that to the return of the connect function, passing in all of these constants. We're then checking that we have an instance of MySQLi, even though the connect function does some checking to ensure that we have a connection established. Once we know we have the MySQLi object returned, we can then echo out some bits and pieces about MySQL. So in this case, the client info and the client version. Okay, so that's that set up. That's all well and good, but we need to have a server for this to actually run. So what we're going to do is go back into here. I'm just going to exit the MySQL command prompt and clear that down. The next thing I'm going to do is actually run a local web server of PHP. So if I did ls, we can see that these are the files that we've created. And if I did PHP -S using localhost with port 8000, it could be anything you want, that will create a local running web server using the current working directory as the document root. Which means now that I can go back into here, I can click onto here, which is my local host, refresh the page, and we can see that we have established a MySQL connection. So here we've got client info, we have the MySQL bits and pieces, that's the version number, and we've also got the other, the other verbose version number, I suppose, if you will. So this is the 5.0.12_dev version of MySQL that we're running. So that is how we can connect to MySQL through PHP. Now, what I would say is that you need to ensure that you have connection outside of PHP, because believe you me, when this goes wrong and your configuration is not correct, you need to have something that works so you can actually compare the configuration that you're using. Now, often or not, you'll probably get a problem if the configuration is wrong. So what I'm going to do is break this to show you the issue, the actual error that we have returned. So instead of having this lovely correct username that we've got, let's put something else in. In fact, what I can do is hack up this. So let's just do here, let's just do comment that out and put in a constant value of db underscore username of something completely different. So username is equal to blah, 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 blah. Now that should throw an error. So let's just refresh the page and see what happens. So yes, we've got an exception. So it's thrown an exception. Access denied for user blah, 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 blah at localhost. Localhost is the host that we're running, okay? And using password yes. So that is the error that you will get back if there is a problem with your username and password. Now, what I'm going to do is just put this back as it is, and then I'll commit this to the GitHub repository after I've published this video. So let's just refresh the page, and now we have established the connection. Now, Docker in Motion is the database that we're using. I'm going to be playing with that later on in other tutorials, but Docker in Motion is part of the course that I've got running for Manning Publications. It is a course, an interactive course, like a lot of the How to Code Well videos, but a very higher production quality. I've spoken about that before in the Docker in Motion announcement that I'll link to in this video too. Docker in Motion is available at Manning Publications. If you're learning Docker, then do check that out. It's going to be quite a very in-depth, intuitive course on Docker, so do check that out if you wish. Thanks ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone, and I'll see you again in the next one. Thank you. Bye.